Hello, everyone, and welcome to an episode of Marriage on a Tightrope. As you can see here, this is going to be an interview on the Listen, Learn, Love podcast that we did with Richard Ostler. If you don't want to hear some of the story that we've already told about my faith journey and some other aspects of our journey together, you can skip to about the 34.5-minute mark. Richard asked some other questions that bring out some parts of our story that we haven't quite talked about in such great detail. So hopefully that will be of interest to you. Also want to announce that Bill Reel, Anthony Miller, and I have started a series of podcasts that is reviewing the Gospel Topics essays. Full disclosure, if you know who Bill Reel and Anthony Miller are, and who I am, we are no longer believers. And so if that is threatening or uncomfortable for you to listen to three non-believers have a discussion about the Gospel Topics essays, you have been warned. But if that is interesting to you, go ahead and check it out in the main Mormon Discussions podcast feed. We hope you enjoy this episode with Richard Ostler and check out his other episodes of Listen, Learn, and Love.
Welcome to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Ostler. My guest on today's podcast is a married couple that lives close to me in the Murray area, Allan and Kattie Mount, M-O-U-N-T. Am I saying your names right?
You are.
You are.
Kattie is K-A-T-T, two T's.
Two T's. It looks like Kattie, but it is Katie.
You've been dealing with that your whole life, honey?
Yes.
And Allan is A-L-L-A-N.
I get misspelled, but not mispronounced.
And just to give you background, this couple is married. They're in their late 30s. They have 4 kids from age 5 to 13. They are in the space where Kattie is an active LDS member, serves as the primary president, and Allan is somebody who was once a believer and is not a believer. And this is what I would call a mixed faith marriage podcast on how LDS families navigate the space when a family member or a spouse develops different beliefs that weren't there when they first got married, and what are principles that keep us together and keep the family circle together. And this is a really, what I would consider a success story, because this is a really strong marriage, and this couple has developed really good skills to keep their marriage together, in fact, maybe even stronger, navigating a road they didn't know that they'd be navigating. Allan isn't someone trying to draw people out of the church. So when some people leave, they maybe rightly so want to share their story and kind of draw other people to their conclusions. And Allan has sort of developed, I think, a discipline. Maybe on a one-on-one conversation, he'll explain what happened and why his journey went his way. But that's not going to be the focus of this podcast. There are other podcasts that are talking about the reasons people left, and this is a podcast we're probably not going to get in that space. But I think we'll talk a little bit about Allan's journey and why that's been difficult for him, and also in Kattie and how you're navigating that. Is that okay for an introduction?
That's
perfect.
A great introduction. Yes, thank you.
So you two met in the MTC.
We did.
Tell us a little bit about that.
You got there first, so you can tell that story, honey.
I did.
I assume Provo MTC.
Yes,
That's right.
we were in the Provo MTC, and day one, May 8th, 2002, Allan was made the district leader, and I was one of 3 sisters. We were a small group. There were 7 of us total. And I like to say that Allan was young and impulsive. And so at first we didn't really get along. I thought that I was older and wiser, because at that time you had to be 21 to go on a mission.
2 years older than this guy.
So I was, he left 20. He left a year later. So yeah, he was a year younger than me, but I mean, of course, I knew better. That's what I thought.
I was a very young 20. I was probably 17 inside.
And so we spent 3 weeks in the MTC in Provo. And then we went to the Madrid MTC for 6 weeks.
Wow.
And in the Madrid MTC, we actually became really good friends. And our whole group really bonded together. We were very close. All of us were very close.
The Madrid MTC was a really cool experience because it's very small. It's not open anymore, but it's right on Temple Square, right there. I don't know if that's the official term for it there in Madrid, but
that's cool.
It's on the 5th and 6th floor. And you can just kind of wander around. They didn't have a rule that you had to be with your companions at all times because it's so small and condensed. There's only 40 to 50 missionaries there at a time.
That's cool.
And so friendships just blossomed. And this isn't me implying that Katie and I were ever alone, because we weren't. But it was just very natural to walk around and talk to teachers and talk to the MTC president, who happened to be my stake president from Santa Barbara, California. That was really cool.
That's cool.
Just a great, great experience.
And then you were assigned to Barcelona.
Yeah, we were assigned to Barcelona, and I remember we went to the mission office, and our mission president did this fun thing where, he revealed the map, and he told you where you were going, and you met your companion, and you were out the door. It was real quick. And so Allan and I, out of all the missionaries, Allan and I were sent to adjoining areas. So
About 3 hours south of the mission home.
Yeah, 3 hours south in Valencia. So we sat on the train together, and we went to our areas, and then we saw each other at zone conferences. And then it was funny because when he got transferred up north, I got transferred up north. So we kind of went in the same pattern together. We spent almost the whole mission in side-by-side areas, never in the same mission or in the same area, but just side by side. And I went home, and Allan still had 6 months left. And I wrote everyone in our group because I just loved them and wanted to keep ties with them. And Allan and I wrote to each other. Allan's from Santa Barbara, California. And before coming out to the mission, he was playing volleyball at UCLA. And so...
How tall are you, Allan?
2 meters in Spain, 6'7" here in the States.
I hope you can see his height on the podcast. So
I'll try to talk.
He looks like a volleyball player.
Yeah, he was. And he swore he would never come to BYU because...
Big rivalry.
He was a big
BYU
rival.
And UCLA volleyball.
I remember that.
And so, and I was at the time at UVSC. It used to be UVSC before it became UVU. And then it's funny. I put in an application to transfer to BYU, and he got an offer to play volleyball at BYU. And so, I kid you not, I wrote him a letter saying, I'll be at BYU in the fall. And he wrote me a letter and said, I'll be at BYU in the fall. And within days of each other, we both got each other's letter. And I thought, oh, this is interesting.
I think we both scratched our chins a little and
Yeah, we thought, maybe this could work. Maybe something could work out. And then he got home from his mission, and
it was quick.
It was quick. He got home in June. We were engaged in August.
That's
and
great.
We were married in December.
That's awesome. And what year were you married?
2004.
So you've been married 15 years.
Yeah.
15 years this
And you
December.
got busy having kids.
We sure did. I'll tell our first kid came from, I still was playing volleyball at BYU. And the original plan was, let's finish off volleyball eligibility, play all 3 years. I played 1 year at UCLA, so I had 3 more left. And then we were in the Provo temple doing laundry in the bottom of the Provo basement, a temple basement, doing laundry. And that's one of the only places in the temple you can kind of have a conversation with someone. And we were talking, and warning for all those who are listening that don't have kids yet, if you ask the question to your spouse, should we start having kids, and you're in the temple, the answer will be yes. So we felt we should. And so because of my scholarship, I had to quit volleyball to get a job to pay because I couldn't earn money with my scholarship. So I quit playing volleyball 2 years short of eligibility, and we started our family. And now our oldest turns 13 tomorrow.
Wow, that's a sacrifice, but a blessing.
Yeah, it is a blessing. It really did feel good at the time, and on the hard days we kick ourselves and say, "Why did we do that?" But
I'm not proud when I point out to our 13-year-old, "I gave up volleyball for you. You need to treat me better."
Just a little more background on Katie and Allan. Katie is in real estate, works for a real estate company here in Utah.
I do. I work in Pleasant Grove for my sister's real estate company. I'm the director of operations there. It's a great job. I'm taking the summer off as soon as the Parade of Homes is over.
And that keeps you busy. And Allan, you're in software sales.
I am, yeah. I've been with the company In Moment which is in South Jordan, for 8 years.
That's great. And you started a podcast. We're going to reference Marriage on a Tightrope. Give us an overview of the podcast.
Sure. Yeah. Marriage on a Tightrope is our podcast. We started it in January of 2018. So it's been just about a year and a half now, which is absolutely insane how quickly it's gone. Mm-hmm. But the entire purpose of that podcast is to give other mixed faith couples another voice so they know that they're not alone. The entire podcast was spawned by Katie's conversation with a leader, in where she asked him, is there anyone in the stake I can talk to? Is there anybody in our situation? And when she heard the answer was no, what did that make you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I said, you don't even have to give me a name, but just like think about someone that could help me navigate this, because I'm a to-do list person. I really like knowing what's coming next. And I just didn't know anyone that had ever been in a mixed faith marriage. And so I wanted someone to talk to, just to relate to. And I asked this member of the stake presidency, and he said, there really isn't anyone you can talk to. And I think that was hurtful for me, because I just couldn't believe that there wasn't anyone. And I think too, I thought, if he really doesn't know anyone, it's because people are afraid to talk about it or seek help themselves. And so one day I said to Allan, what would you think about doing a podcast about what we're going through? And he was so excited because he was like, yes, let's do it.
Yeah. My brother and I have done an entertainment video game podcast for a decade now.
Wow.
And crossing that passion of mine with my spouse just felt like the coolest opportunity. So I was just over the moon at the opportunity. And so it got off the ground very, very quickly. We found a already established umbrella to fit us into their listenership. So right off the bat, we had thousands of listeners.
That's cool.
So right from the get-go with the first episode, we were getting inundated with emails of, oh my goodness. And the theme, especially at the beginning, was I never knew anyone was in the same situation. I thought we were alone. It was a lifeline for people to, and this is credit to Katie, but also this isn't the point of talking about it. It was just, there's so much pain, and it feels so lonely on both sides. And so, the non-believing spouse, I say in air quotes on this audio podcast, the non-believing spouse didn't have anyone to talk to, and suddenly now there is someone else here. The believing spouse, same exact thing with Katie, and it's just been a crazy journey. And the dirty little secret that we have is that we've gotten so much more out of it than our listeners.
That's cool.
Because we've talked to hundreds of couples. Yesterday, we were telling you before we started recording, we presented to about 25 mixed faith couples, all about this, very raw emotions, but everyone in the room trying to make this work, right? And it's just been a huge blessing in our lives.
How do people find your podcast, and do you have a website?
We do, yeah. You can go to marriageonatightrope.org. On all your podcast apps, you can search Marriage on a Tightrope and subscribe to it there. We are under the Mormon Discussions, which is Bill Reel, his podcast Umbrella, which, full disclosure, has a wide array of topics. So if you want to just listen to our podcast, it's Marriage on a Tightrope. You can search for that.
Good. One of the things that, as we visited earlier, is just sort of what happened with Allan. A lot of our listeners are probably wondering where you went from a fully believing returned missionary out of Barcelona, married in the temple, to in 2017, everything shifted. And you kind of, before we started the podcast, I don't really want to, I don't feel like this is the scope of my podcast for you to share that full journey. I've heard a little bit before we went live, and I've learned to hear those stories, but I think as I hear these stories, there's different categories, and one category is a category where I testified of something, and I felt the Spirit as I testified, and then I later learned that what I testified of as I read the gospel essays or other church-authorized material, that indeed what I was teaching was not actually true. And that then creates a lot of dissonance, especially if there was a spiritual experience. Is that a fair way to frame up what happened to you?
Absolutely fair. Absolutely fair way of framing it up. What I didn't tell you before, right, was I found the Gospel Topics essays while I was preparing a lesson to teach Elders Quorum, because I was Elders Quorum president at the time. This was an award in Taylorsville. So this actually occurred in 2014. And that was also 6 months after my father had been killed by a drunk driver in Georgia.
Wow.
That experience, I remember a couple of months after he passed. If you've had someone close to you pass, there's actually hyper-spirituality at the beginning. Your family's drawn so much closer together. Everyone's supporting each other. You feel so much love. And as time goes on, the messages of love stop. The friends that were showering you with love go back to their lives, and you're left with all of the destruction of losing a father prematurely. And I remember a few months after he passed, calling my mom and kind of crying to her and saying, I don't feel him. Like it feels so final. And she said the same thing. She said, I know. What do we do? And it was such a vulnerable moment. I think that was some emotional chinks in my armor, if you will. Serving as Elders Quorum president, I absolutely loved it. And I still love those people. And you want to talk to somebody that has a testimony of home teaching or ministering, I'm your guy. I'll defend it till the day I die. I loved. I saw the power of it, and I loved it. So serving as that, when this all happened, it was a bombshell. And talking to Katie about it after I found this discrepancy in what I had felt the Spirit tell me and what I had learned, that conversation went very poorly, and I was very scared. So you talk about this metaphor of putting something on a shelf. I put all of this on the shelf, and I said, forget that. I'm not going to even think about that stuff. I'm doubling down. I'm back. I was working even harder and harder, and then we moved towards. And in 2017, so this is now 2.5 or so years later, I was in a better place. I felt I'm skipping a little bit of the anxiety and depression story that I went through those intermediary years. That's not the right word, but that's all right.
That's a good word.
Thank you. And then in the beginning of 2017, that depression, anxiety had dissipated, and I thought, I need to figure this out. And so I told Katie, I'm going to figure this out. And what was that for you? Was that concerning to you that I was going to figure this out?
Yeah. So I remember we were sitting in our car in the driveway, and when he said he was going to figure it out, because I could tell that it was something that had been wearing on him, I felt complete peace. I felt total peace that everything was going to work out. And I told him, I said, I really feel like it'll all work out. And he said, yeah, but is it going to work out the way that you want it to work out? Are you willing to accept what will be in store in the future? And I said, I just know that I have peace and I feel good about it, and it will all work out. And I didn't think that it would turn into what it is now. But especially during those dark years where our families didn't know. And I think, with a lot of problems, especially in your marriage, you really try to work through things together before you tell anybody. You want to come to a conclusion, or you want to come to like an understanding before your whole family knows. So it was a really dark year.
2017 was the dark year.
Because I had no one to talk to, and Allan really didn't either. And I just kept praying and having faith that it would all work out the way it was supposed to. And when it wasn't working the way I thought it would, I was really upset. It was hard. It was hard for a while.
It's honest. And I think both of you mentioned it's hard for both of you. It's not like what you're doing. I assume, as I've met with people in faith crises, Allan, most of them actually want to find a way to stay.
Yeah.
And I did a Twitter poll one day and said, if you've got a temple recommend and or in a faith crisis, do you want to find a way to stay or to leave? And 88% said find a way to stay.
Yeah.
And was that your experience too?
It absolutely was 100%, to the point that I still have an active tempo recommend. I don't know if my stake president's listening. Maybe this is your cue to deactivate it. It's still active till August. I haven't been in quite a while, but it's still there.
So you're honoring the spirit of the tempo recommend, even though it's technically active.
Right. Yes, I am. And that was August 2017, right? At that point, all of probably April or so of 2017 until December of 2018, so a year and a half, I still attended. And I was trying very hard to make it work. And I think that the hardest part, I shouldn't say the hardest part in such an absolute way, but one of the more difficult parts of it was 2017 was Doctrine and Covenants in church history in Sunday school. And being in Sunday school and hearing some things, and meanwhile, during the week and after church, I'm spending 6 to 10 hours every single day reading church materials and reading this and reading that and listening to that. And then somebody in Sunday school says, again, I'm going to be vague, based on listenership. We do the same thing on our podcast. The truth claims themselves aren't the most important part, but that difficulty for me was someone saying one thing, me knowing that's not actually what the church even teaches, raising my hand to give my thoughts on that and say, well, actually, if you read here on LDS.org, it says this, and then getting fierce and my teeth are clenched because I've had fingers pointed at me and teeth clenched, and that is not how it is. And I was like, I'm not safe here. I raising my hand for 8 to 12 months. And then the last probably 8 months, it was sacrament only. And then come December, even in sacrament, I couldn't take it. It was just too painful. It was too harmful for me personally. And I think probably the last September, October, November, I was only there because I didn't want Katie to be alone, because I knew she didn't want to be alone. But it came to a point where I just couldn't do it.
I'm pretty tender-hearted hearing your story, because I've been up front with a mini faith crisis I had, and it resulted in me remaining a fully believing member, but it also gave me great insight to your road, Allan. And my reaction is just to put my arms around you and say you've done everything you know how to do, and not to put any shame or any new list of things for you to do. And just to put my arms around you and say, I love you, brother. And Julie D'Azevedo Hanks had a list of things we ought to say to people as they leave. Some of those things are, thank you for your service. Thank you for spending 2 years of your life in Barcelona. Thank you for being a wonderful Elders Quorum president and bringing people to Christ. Thank you for the good man you are. And just sort of putting my arms around you in an increasing way as you walk a road that you probably didn't really want to walk. Now, there are some that leave, and it might be sin-related and rebellion-related, but there's a lot. To just categorize all that in one lump is unfair to people like you. And so, and then I give you incredible credit, and I don't know how you do this, that you don't want to draw other people towards you. So it would be very natural to say, this is my journey, this is what I learned, and to sort of draw other people, say, you ought to leave with me.
Right.
How do you, and maybe you can't always do that, but how do you including your wife and your kids, how do you walk that road where this is my road, I don't know what label you want to take on, but I'm not necessarily trying to draw other people my way.
In short, I think the best way of putting it is we both try not to focus on true and false or right and wrong anymore. We try to focus on this works versus this doesn't work for me. If I can focus on that, it becomes a whole lot easier for me to accept Katie's point of view as, I'm not going anywhere. The church works for me. I get joy out of it. I love it. What kind of loving husband would I be to want to strip away joy and love from my wife? That's not a fair thing to do. When people ask me, and this happens very seldomly when people ask me that are still believers, how did this happen? What happened? Tell me about your story. At the very beginning, I wanted to sit down and for 2 hours rattle off bullet point after bullet point after bullet point of truth claim issues. And you didn't know this, I bet. And oh my goodness. And ultimately, I found that wasn't helpful. It didn't, if my goal was to pull someone out of the church, that doesn't work, talking to them that way. It feels like an attack on something that they hold dear. And so having those conversations now, if someone asks me, about a month ago, I had a former missionary companion want to go to lunch, and he asked me that question. And I told him without specifics. And he even asked a very brave question of if I were you, wait a minute, if you were me, if you were me and I wanted to learn more about what you learned, where would you go to read? Can you imagine, Richard, being in my position? The ball's in my court. I can send him anywhere I want, and I know he's going to read it. And I said, if you really, really want to, go to lds.org and read the gospel topics essays. But if everything's working for you, I'm very happy for you. It's great. You don't feel like you have to go. I just appreciate you asking me how I feel and sitting down with me to lunch. It's good to see you. I hadn't seen him in 15 years. So for me, it goes back to sandwich it back to that beginning is focus on more of this works, this doesn't. And instead of true and false.
What was helpful for leaders in your journey? Because you opened up to leaders. You're opening up to your dear wife, but you're also opening up to leaders. Can you give any counsel? And I don't want to imply that a really effective leader would have kept you from leaving, because that sort of invalidates your journey. And so I don't want to imply that. But what would you say to leaders that are ministering to somebody like you? And probably with the goal to maybe a couple goals. One, to honor your journey, to sort of recognize the emotional trauma you're going through, and maybe to be able to give you a way to stay.
Yeah, that was in 2018. I met with my stake president 7 or 8 times, and he was a great listener. He very much wanted to get into the details of the individual issues that I had, but we did so very respectfully. So I don't even think that was a deterrent. He didn't try to tell me I was wrong. He would nod his head. I actually think I had an ideal stake president for that year.
That's awesome.
Because I would share, this is what I said in Sunday school last week, and he said, it's not the tip of this. He said this to a number of my comments. He said, that's not the traditional way of looking at it, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with that perspective, and it shouldn't have been reacted to like that. And I said, well, thank you. To the point that I have a podcast with my wife, and so I'm very vocal. I'm very willing to put myself out there. So the last few visits that we had were centered towards holding a 5th Sunday, 3rd hour, well, there were still 3 hours, meeting amongst all of the wards and the stake, just kind of go one by one, to team teach the stake president and me about disagreeing respectfully and being more open to other people's opinions. This is what we were discussing to do. It never ended up happening.
Okay.
Not to his fault, and you'll know why in here in a second. But he actually went to his area authority and got permission and discussed it with other area stake presidents who seemed to like the idea. And so we had planned on that. We hadn't even discussed format or anything. And then our last meeting, which was in December of 2018, he said, you may have heard, but I'm getting released. And at that point, something else happened. The new stake president was called in. He was just as great. But something changed within me where it dawned on me that maybe the people in my ward, and maybe other wards, but in my ward specifically, they don't want that. Maybe they go to church to be surrounded by people that are like-minded and that believe the same things, and they get strength from that. So I started feeling bad about my desire to change them, not to believe or throw out the beliefs that they have, but I didn't want to introduce some discomfort just because I wanted to still be there. It felt very selfish of me to try to push for that. And because going was so painful, I just kind of, in December, I just went, it's okay. I'll just throw in the towel. It's all right. I can get my spiritual fulfillment in other ways. And I waved goodbye. Now, I'll still go back. Mother's Day, I didn't want Kitty to be alone on Mother's Day, so I went for Mother's Day and been back to helping with a few things here and there when she needs it, when she's helping with primary. So you kind of grin and bear it and do what you can.
It's a pretty cool story, and I want to hear more of Katie's perspective. I remember hearing a talk from, I think it was Bruce Hafen, sort of talking about a maturity where he didn't want to pop other people's bubbles. He actually, or balloons, and I think he's a real faithful, believing member, but he kind of is walked in this space a little bit. And I'm just paraphrasing what I remember him saying. It was sort of like, and not everybody, I'm not sure this is the right thing for everybody, but he sort of talks about not needing to go around and pop everybody's balloon.
Right.
And it reminds me of what you said at church. And it doesn't mean those people are shallow or they're uneducated. There's no inference there that they've got their head in the sand. But I like the way you just said that for them, that's what they really want and really need, is to come to church and have a like-minded experience with a group of people that agree, and there's no sort of challenging of anybody, and and that probably for a lot of people really meets a really very much of a spiritual and emotional need. And so I've thought about that, and I thought, do I want to do anything to pop anybody's bubble? You probably wish your bubble in some ways hadn't been popped.
Everything was going great.
So I've thought about that. I've thought about a book that I read from him also, sort of talking about, and I don't know if you feel like you could ever do this, he sort of talked about the Kirtland Temple being this incredible experience, of all the visions that happened there, and just, the community was behind it, and I think, and then the Nauvoo Temple was just the opposite. It was just, everything that, we know that story, and he just talked about how for some people there's a Kirtland part of their life and there's a Nauvoo part of their life, but he does sort of paint that back to having a framework to keep faith, and I don't want to infer that you're weak because you haven't done that. Does the term deconstruction and reconstruction, that term, Allan, and some people are able to sort of deconstruct and then reconstruct and remain in the church, and do we explain that term to our listeners?
Well,
and how that has or hasn't worked for you? Sure.
The deconstruction, man, how long was that process?
Really long.
Yeah. It was a long time, and you're deconstructing things. In fact, there was a point where I was deconstructing Christ and Heavenly Father, and Katie actually kind of metaphorically slapped me in the face. Let me use a different term because that's a bit aggressive. She said, I feel like you're letting your issues with the church impact your relationship with God. And that was a wake-up call to me to kind of say, now hold on a second, and focus on God and Christ. And I remember giving even in late 2017, standing up in Fast and Testimony meeting and talking about spirituality, and not in a harmful way, just kind of trying to build up this spiritual shell that I could, and I was trying to do it within the boundaries of the church, but the deconstructing of all of the church. And then for me, I'll be honest, Richard, there was never an attempt to reconstruct the church, but certainly there is an ongoing effort to reconstruct spiritually. But for me, that doesn't mean trying to fit in truth. Again, truth is not, that's a very difficult term for me right now, because one of my core spiritual values is embracing uncertainty. I don't enjoy the I know type of testimonies. I have a very strong hope that I will live with my family again. I have a very strong hope that that I will be resurrected? I don't know. And so I don't know how strong of a house you can reconstruct when you're not comfortable with capital T truth anymore. Just yesterday, I'm kind of rattling off a number of things, but just yesterday, my son came home from church, 11 years old, and I asked him what he spoke about in primary, and he said that they spoke about the resurrection. I said, "Oh, what did you think about that?" He's a boy of very few words. He just kind of shrugged his shoulders. And I said, "Well, do you want to know what I think about that?" And he said, "Sure." And I said, "Well, I believed it my whole life, but the last few years, I'm not so sure anymore. I really hope that I get to see my dad again, and I would love to be with you forever. That would be great. But I'm not sure. You should ask your mom what she thinks, because she still really believes it." And he said, "Okay." And then he grabbed a cookie and ran upstairs. I don't know. I'm venturing off from your original question.
I want to thoughts as Katie. Any thoughts? I'm sure thoughts come to your mind. Share some thoughts with our listeners.
Oh gosh, I don't even know where to begin.
That's a big door to open.
It is. I think a lot of people worry in our position. How do you teach your kids? Just going off of what Allan just said. How do you talk to your kids about your new beliefs? And for a while, we did a lot of groundwork. We talked a lot about agency, and we talked about opinions, and we talked about, we go to our church. I take them to church with us most Sundays, but every once in a while we'll have Allan Church, which is what we call, and he'll pick something to do, and we'll go do it as a family. And we've been to a couple other churches. We went to a rock church. And we had a friend that played guitar in the band, and so we went to go support him. And when we left, it was so interesting because the kids, I said, "Okay, well, what did you think about it?" And my daughter said it was not reverent at all. And my son said it was awesome. And we talked about, I said, we went to the rock church and we go to an LDS church. Which church is the right church? And my daughter, my 7-year-old, is the one that said, "Well, neither of them are right. It's what your opinion is." And I thought that was really poignant, because I think that that's something that kids need to learn early on, is that you can have a differing belief. You can have a difference of opinion. And it may not be that you're wrong, but that that's just how they feel. And I feel like we did a lot of that in the beginning with Allan, because when it finally came to it and he stopped going to church with us, we wanted to have that laid out so that the kids knew that Dad doesn't believe anymore, but Mom does. And because of that, Dad's not going to go to church with us anymore. But Allan is super supportive. I mean, when I'm at ward council, he gets the kids ready. He has lunch for us when we come home. If I need help, he comes and helps us. And so, I feel like that it's been an interesting road with the kids. I think there's a lot of anxiety in that. How do you navigate that? But, we still have a base common core and values that Allan and I agree on. And, it really doesn't have to do with religion. We want them to learn to be good, loyal, trustworthy members of society. There are lots of things that we still want them to learn and do. And a friend of ours described it as like you're looking into a daffodil field and you see one red rose, and your eye is drawn to that one red rose, and that can be, problems that you see in your spouse, right? And so Allan's not believing, and when you focus on that one thing, you lose some of the goodness that he also brings. So, with the common core values, that's kind of what we looked at. We looked at the broader picture. What do we both agree on? What do we want the kids to know? What do we want to teach them? And so that's where we've been able to come together on and move forward with the kids.
Is your marriage, I'm sure it's been stretched, and I'm sure I assume some of your most difficult days have happened during this time. Is your marriage better now or the same or worse than it was before this all started, Katie?
I know that it's better.
I'm okay with the term "I know" in that case.
I know that it's better. That's right. I think that we have developed skills that we didn't have before. Big time in communication, big time in trust. The level of love that we feel for each other has been heightened. The level of service that we've been able to do together through the podcast for other couples has just been incredible. And, even in the darkest days, I said to Allan, is it weird that something like this has brought us closer together? I don't understand it. I feel like something like this could easily just pull you apart, but it hasn't for us. And I have to say that, in the beginning of our podcast, I think we tried to save marriages because we wanted people to just stay together no matter what. And then we learned that, some people were not great matches, and adding something like a faith crisis and entering into the marriage was too difficult for them to handle. So I don't pass judgment on anyone that doesn't stay together because they have their own journey as well. But for us, we had a really good foundation and a really good marriage. And
this is a love story.
Yeah, it's.
Allan, what are your thoughts on this question about your marriage?
Yeah, it reminds me of the conversation Katie had early on with the same-stake president. Katie received a letter from someone close to us saying that she should do the hard thing and do what the pioneer women did and leave their unfaithful husbands and cross the plains and go to Zion. That was not a threat to us because we had already decided this is not going to be the reason why we break up, because this is the one red rose. Everything else is daffodils and beautiful, even though red roses are pretty nice. But they do have thorns, right?
That's right.
But this same stake president, Katie in distress, went to him and just, look at this email I got. And the same stake president said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. There is absolutely no precedence for a spouse leaving the church being a reason for divorce, unless he's being abusive, if he's having an affair. And I know Allan. I'd been meeting with him. None of those things are happening. No, none of those things are happening. He's a great man. He's a great father. Why would that ruin anything? So that's, again, very, very grateful for him.
What about a spouse that feels like to protect the kids they have to divorce, and they're worried the non-believing spouse is pulling the kids in the same direction, and they want to separate the kids from that voice?
Well, my first word of caution would be to the non-believing spouse that don't try to pull your kids. Why would you want to try to pull them? And the same thing to the believing spouse. Don't try to pull the kids. I don't know why, but
Some would say the default ought to be give the kids an environment to believe. And the default ought to be, keep them coming to church, keep them every chance to stay in the church, and sort of honor the believing spouse with the path of the kids.
I don't know if I'd go that far, Richard.
It's okay.
But I would say that the non-believing spouse, whether they chose this path or not, again, like you said, I don't feel like I wanted this to happen, but it certainly is not something Katie chose. So I recognize that even though I may not be comfortable with some of the things that my kids may learn at church that I don't agree with, or I don't want that to sink in, I recognize that it was on me. This change happened because of my journey, and I need to be patient with their involvement with the church. I need to be supportive when they want to go to young men's. When they want to go to young women's, I need to be supportive of that. I'd be a hypocrite if I weren't, because I'm expecting the same respect from people and my decision not to go, I need to respect their decision to go. Now, I think one of the big things that Katie and I talk about is we have to talk and be open with our kids to the level of their understanding. I'm not going to go pull my 5-year-old and read the Journal of Discourses with him. It's well beyond his reach and his scope. So for us, we've kind of decided that we'll handle these tough topics as they present themselves to us. We've been very clear with the kids. If you ever have a question, ask us, and we'll tell you what we both feel, and they will know because we've been very deliberate about holding each other's hands, sitting next to each other on the couch, Katie and I. When we talk about some of these difficult things, we provide a united front to the kids, but that does not mean we agree, right? We can have different opinions. So we've talked about our 12-year-old going on 13. In 6 years, he's going to be making a decision. Is he going to be a missionary? And no matter what happens, one of us is going to be on the losing side, quote unquote. And how are we going to handle that? Just like I'm not okay with my 12-year-old not going to church because he's just tired. Like, that's not a good reason not to go. Katie has asked me, what are you going to do when he comes to you and says, Dad, I'm not sure if I want to serve a mission? Well, my question is going to be, why? Richard, it's going to be, why don't you want to serve a mission? And if he says, well, it's going to be hard and it's going to be, I'm going to miss you. I'm going to be, okay, well, I understand that. It was hard for me, but guess what? I was a C- student when I left and I was an A+ student when I got back. The mission does a lot for a person. And do you believe it? Well, yeah, I believe it. Well, then you should go. And I'll call you every single Monday and we'll talk. I absolutely am ready to push that. Same story, whether he comes to me or to Katie. If he says, I'm not sure if I want to serve a mission, I don't believe this, well, he shouldn't go. So it's on either side, we both have to kind of be patient,
I like
be willing to
specific
accept.
Examples. The mission's a good one, and the resurrection was even a good one.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really like you did, because kids sometimes create more, and I love the way you just, in a factual way, because I think they can handle it. Dad doesn't believe in church. I believe in church. Mm-hmm. And we still love each other. Our family's together. We're still going to go on vacations. Dad's not going to go to church anymore. And I think kids can handle just kind of honest, open communication. And they sort of like shrug their shoulders. Oh, okay. Can I still play video games? And
right.
That's exactly, and that's
so
the
I
reaction.
think we sometimes build up these conversations with our kids, but I think it's okay to just have these conversations and just sort of factually. And during the podcast, you've held hands many times, and it's tender to me just to see the strength of your marriage and the fact that I love what you said, Katie, is this has caused us to develop better tools than we ever had, and has made our marriage stronger, and that's cool. And that's a credit to both of you. It's a love story. Mm-hmm. It is a love story. And I like what you said, that some marriages don't last, and maybe it's not because of the difference in faith. It's just the foundation has not been there, and this is sort of bringing to light a foundation that either hasn't been there or through good therapy has not been able to develop. But I do think as I talk with couples in mixed faith marriages, often the biggest tension is the kids. Mm-hmm. And the role of the non-believing spouse, that for the believing spouse, that can be the most difficult part if they feel, because this dream for the kids, and it's one thing to sort of have your dream with your spouse change, but then if that's going to change the kids, and I sense you're doing a really good job of that, and I think that's really helpful.
Yeah. There is a mourning process. I go through mourning.
Yeah. Do you worry about your kids because Allan doesn't believe? Do you think they're less likely to stay in the church? And how do you, or do you just sort of leave that at the Savior's feet and just say, I can't control my kids' outcomes?
Yeah, I think I grew up in a home where everything was controlled. And I lived in fear a lot of time. So I didn't do things not because I chose not to do them, but because I was afraid. And I don't want my kids to experience that. I don't want them to ever be afraid. I would want them to come to us if if they felt any way about the church. And, the chances and likelihood of all of them staying in and being married to someone who's fully in and them having kids that are fully in are just low. And so I have to be realistic too. And I feel like I'm going to love my kids no matter what. And I think that that's just the theme is when you're loving your kids the way you should, you're going to encourage them to be their best, to do their best, but you'll also be there for them in the really hard times that they have and when it's hard for you. And I recognize that is something that will happen in the future. I don't doubt that it won't happen.
I like that thought. And I'm going to look for a quote that my brother sent out. Any more thoughts, Allan, on this while I'm scanning my Twitter feed?
No, scan away.
I was going to say, too,
Katie.
expectations. I had, I think as members, at the beginning of our marriage, we have all these expectations. Our kids will get baptized. And, the church is really good at hitting monumental ages and, things and there's milestones in their lives. And so I feel like I've had to let go of any expectations I've had for my own future because, I'm not going to be serving a mission with my husband. And that was sad because we served in Barcelona and I thought, one day we could go back and be mission presidents or something. And I had to let go of that. I think that it's the same way with the kids. I let go of a lot of expectations. Not that I don't expect them to be good people. I just don't expect them to follow the same path that I did. Or Allan, because it's their own path.
And I like that. And it's kind of a related topic. My older brother, Dave, is active member of the church, stake president, mission president. I don't think we should credential ourselves, but I just did.
I get it.
And he has adult children that have stepped away. And he talks about this idea of no empty chairs, which is this idea that we may not all be together in the next life. And he's just sort of put that on the shelf. And I like this quote. At our house, my wife and I still talk about no empty chairs, but we talk about having no empty chairs at the dinner table, around the pool, on a vacation, at their life events, and in all the chairs from our children's lives. And I really like that he's not defining his family circle by people's stations with the church and not mourning now a future outcome like, will we not be together as a family? And I like that. And I think that takes the stress and anxiety of your family situation. And if you do have children that step away, he started a support group that I'll just briefly mention for LDS parents of children who believe differently, because it's sort of like you're a spouse that's a believing spouse that needs community, and you're creating that with your podcast. But anyway, it's a Facebook group called Bridges LDS Parents. So if you go onto Facebook and look for a Facebook group called Bridges LDS Parents, I really encourage you to join that group if you have adult children who don't believe.
And for all the non-believing spouses that are listening to that, David and Richard both, but David, I've chatted with David a few times, actually.
Cool. That's awesome.
And his recent article in LDS Living that gives the 6 tips.
About that. Yeah,
those 6 tips that David lays out are awesome, and they're beautiful. I'm on and sorry, the 6 tips are for believing parents that have children that no longer believe. And reading those, we've had a number of listeners already say, this is something safe I can send my parents. LDS Living is trusted. David Ostler is trusted.
Yeah.
And I've been very proud of the post-Mormon circles that I'm in, because those private groups that are full of people that have left are posting that article, and nobody's saying a bad thing. Everybody is saying, oh, this is great. This is awesome. This is a step in the right direction. And that is one of our core tenets. You have to recognize the good. There's nothing more frustrating to me to see someone step away from the church and refuse to believe the church can be anything but awful. It's just not the reality. And the same thing goes on Katie's side. She recognizes our position, and she'll defend if my position is poorly spoken of in any of her circles. whether that's in family or at church. We don't want to paint each other in a way that is black and white, because it's just worlds of gray. We'll call it 100 shades of gray. How about that? You can edit that one out.
I like that. Tell us, I've seen some articles that the church has done on LDS.org with couples in mixed faith marriages. Have you picked up on any of that? And have you seen the church try to do what you're doing is keeping families together and recognizing this as a reality?
So
Nick and Chelsea Homer?
Yeah, there's a couple, Nick and Chelsea Homer. I think that they kind of kicked off some of those mixed faith marriage messages. They were featured on the Instagram account, and then later she wrote an article that came out on LDS.org, and it was all about supporting your unbelieving spouse, and it was an excellent article, and she got a lot of really great feedback about that. Again, I think it was the first time a lot of people had seen someone be so public about it. And so when we were doing our podcast, someone sent us the article, and we had them on our podcast and interviewed them.
You had both of them?
Yeah, we had both of them on. In fact,
do you know what episode number that is by chance, top of your head?
Yeah, let's pull it up.
You pull it up. They live actually about a half a mile from you. They're live in between.
Halfway in between us.
They're a great couple, but that's one couple I can think of. But luckily, we've been really blessed to have a number of couples who have reached out to us, who have allowed us to interview them and talk about their mixed faith marriage and how they're making it work, because it's tricky. And I think that some stories will speak to others more than ours. So giving people, just like you are giving us this platform to come and talk on your program, we try to do the same for just stories that can touch people in different ways. I think that really helps.
Talk about what your ward does that's helpful. Does your ward leadership know? I guess they sort of know Allan doesn't go. You're on ward council. Is his name like on the... You know how in ward council sometimes there might be a prayer roll?
Oh, there's a prayer roll in our ward, yeah.
So is this something... Is Allan's faith talked to... I guess the question is, what kind of ward... If I'm a bishop or a fellow local leader and I know... You're an active member of the ward, Katie, and your husband stepped away. What are helpful things that I can do? And what are things that are painful?
That's a good question. So I think that my bishop was great because he didn't ever talk about it in ward council. And I think it was because I was sitting right there. But he never made Allan a topic of discussion. And it wasn't until Allan decided last December that he was not coming back that I felt like it was time for me to talk about it in ward council, because I knew that none of them would bring it up. Really, at the time, it was maybe the bishop and his counselors that knew. It wasn't the rest of the ward. I'm sure that they had some sort of idea because he was sporadic in and out. But I think that if he had brought it up before I was ready, I probably would have burst into tears, because many of the Sundays that I was alone, if anyone even looked at me wrong, I probably would have just broken down crying. And so in December, I was the one to say, hey, everyone, just want to let you know that Allan won't be attending anymore. If you have any questions, you can ask him. He is open to talking. We're doing great. Our marriage is really good. He has met with the bishop and stake president, and he'll no longer be coming. And everyone just nodded their heads, and we went on. We moved on with ward business. And since then, there was one other time that the elders quorum president just sweetly said, we just want to know what we can do for the Mount family. And I thought it was very nice. He did it in a very loving manner. And, I didn't know what to say. I just said, I said, reach out to Allan, invite him to participate. He has a hard time being here on Sunday, but he still loves being a part of our neighborhood and community. So one of the ward projects we do every spring is we have like 32 widows in our ward. And so one of the projects we did is we have like a spring cleaning, and the elders go around and clean up yards. And so they came and extended Allan a call to come and be in charge of that. And Allan did it.
Wow.
That was, about a month, maybe a little more than that now, but recently.
How was that for you?
It was great. I think one of the more tragic parts of a faith transition out is the loss of a community. That's why I tried so hard to stay. The community is super powerful and super positive, especially here in Murray, Utah, where it's predominantly, our ward is 3 streets wide, and so all of our neighbors are our ward members. So the opportunity for me to rub shoulders with them and do service with them, that was what Elders Quorum was all about for me anyway. And so being able to do that again was awesome. And I've made it clear, hopefully, that I'm very, very comfortable doing those types of things, while I'm not comfortable doing, I'm not going to be going to Ward Temple night, so you probably shouldn't invite me. But reach out if there's service opportunities, if the Elders Quorum's going bowling, and I'd love to go. That's great. And I'm not going to bring up anything. We're just a bunch of dudes trying to be dudes.
It's really cool.
Yeah, so I think...
Did you think you'd get released? Did you somehow think, my spouse doesn't believe, now I can't be a good primary president? And somehow I don't know where your mind in a not healthy moment could take you, because I think and I'm assuming Allan would agree, I think you're probably really awesome primary president.
I'll be so honest, I think primary saved me. Kids don't care. They don't care if you're sad. They don't care if you are having a bad day. They have no judgment. So I felt like me having something where I felt comfortable and that I loved and I served, and where they just loved me and I loved them so much in return. It's just such a little safe place. And when I got called to primary, I had never even served in the primary before. And then they threw me in the deep end of the ocean, and they called me as the president, and we had just moved in. And
wow.
and I told the bishop I have 0 experience. And he's like, I know, but I just really think you should do this. And I didn't know anyone in the ward. And I went through just all of my dark days was while I was primary president. But somehow being at church every Sunday and seeing the kids and seeing them live like these really simple, having simple testimonies, teaching the gospel so elementary was so good for me. And I just appreciated it. And so I'm actually at the point now where I'm worried that they're going to release me, because I don't know where... 3 years? Yeah, I'm going on 3 years, and I just don't know where I fit. If I'm being totally honest, I would say that I'm a little nuanced. I don't know how you can't be when you're in a mixed faith marriage, but it has been just heaven in primary.
It's really cool. I bet you've been a great primary president. Have you resented her serving in the church, Allan, and being gone from the home and the meetings she'd go to? And have you felt feelings of resentment? Because some spouses might, that the church is sort of more important than our relationship, or is taking time away from us.
There was a time where, I don't know, let's call it resentment, just not to nitpick. There was a time that I was. We had conversations on, and it stemmed from the fact that every Sunday I was getting my kids ready and my wife was marching them off, and I was left alone. And my neighborhood was alone. My neighborhood was empty as well, And at first...
You could catch all the burglars.
Right? I know.
There's a lot here.
Neighborhood watch.
I'm just teasing you.
Oh, I know. For a couple of weeks, it was like, wow, I get these 3 hours to myself, and look how much I can get done or not get done, and just play games and do this. That gets old pretty quick. And so there was the feeling of, and I still don't like it. I still don't like being alone for those 2 hours now. But we had a conversation out on our back patio one day that goes right along with what Katie just shared. And I was complaining to her, saying, why does it have to be church every Sunday? Why can't we go hiking? It's beautiful outside. Why can't we go hiking? And her response was, we can. Can we just do it after? I serve God in the primary. That's where I feel close to him, and I love it. And for whatever reason, that got through my thick skin. And in that moment, I just thought, I should not be trying to pull something that is valuable away from her. So let's schedule that hike, but let's do it so it doesn't interfere with something else that is valuable to you.
I should not try to pull something away that's valuable for her. I love that for someone in a mixed faith marriage. And that's sort of back to Elder Hafen's bursting someone's balloon. I should not try to pull something away that's, I can't remember the rest of the phrase, that's important to her. Yeah. I just admire that. And I think it's back to the fundamentals of your marriage that are really wonderful and really healthy. And you're navigating really complex stuff, but it's giving you a framework to navigate other areas of your marriage. And it's a love I keep coming back, this is a love story. This isn't the love story you thought you'd have.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's a beautiful story of really working through really complicated stuff. And there's emotional, and there's trauma, and there's pain, and there's anger, and all these emotions. And those emotions often get, have to be sort of dealt with. And they get projected sometimes on each other. And that probably has happened at times, but you seem to have worked through that in a really mature, thoughtful way. And I just, it's really remarkable. I'm very touched. I'm touched by the prayer you offered, Katie, at the beginning, and the spirit that's here. I feel a good spirit around both of you. I recognize you're not a believer, but I still feel just a goodness about you, Allan.
Well, Richard, can I say that something that's been so valuable is not denying other people's experiences, right? I feel, and call it karma, call it elevation, emotion, whatever you want to call it, the atmosphere in the room is powerful. And I will not deny that. I don't look at any of the experiences I had and deny it. Even the ones that I now believe I misinterpreted, I still felt those things, and I'm still grateful for those experiences.
And we're kind of coming to the end. Of course, I think about you, Allan, and I think if we had taught the church differently, if you had learned about the gospel topics earlier, and I don't want to invalidate that you're weak because you learned something later and there was no direct, but I do sort of, because I love our church and I want more to be able to stay, and I recognize that I call it unforced errors. It's a tennis term that's sort of, I see unforced errors in our institutional church that cause really wonderful members to question and to leave. And there's a side of me that's able to look inward and say, we need to do better. And it's easy just to say, well, this Satan in the last days and the elect are getting deceived. And I think one of Satan's tools is to keep us from looking inward and see how we can do better. And so I kind of want to look inward, and I believe in the restored church and the doctrine, and the institutional church is sort of a different animal that has to sort of implement the restored church and decide when to teach the gospel essays and how to teach church history, and we're learning how to do that better. But then I think, if we'd just done better. And so I don't know. My own son came home from seminary. He's the youngest, and he came back and talked about the very complicated issue you talked about and how that was taught at his age, pre-mission. He's got a mission call now, and I don't think that's going to, it's not going to then generate a surprise where he learned something different than the church taught and felt a spiritual experience around the original teaching. So I don't know what to make of that. And so I mourn a little bit. I don't feel any need to judge you, but I mourn that I look inward and said, is this an unforced error? Is this something that if we had done better as an institutional church, would you and other really wonderful, incredible people that have left been able to stay? And I don't know the answer to that, and I'm not sure it's a fair question to ask you, because it may invalidate how hard you work to stay. If I just had if you had just learned one thing differently, you'd stay.
Right.
And that's me wanting to put everything back in the nice, tidy box and simplify the complicated nature of this space.
Let me give two examples?
Sure.
One would be, Richard, I could still come back. And in order for me to come back, my position that I currently hold would need to be honored.
Yes.
And also be, I would need to be looked at and treated as a full participating member. I don't know that the church is in a place right now where that's possible. So referring to this nebulous issue that we've talked about, is my space saying, I don't believe that should have ever happened, and I do not accept that came from God. Is the church in a place where someone that holds that position and is vocal about the position can be called as a bishop, can be called as an elders quorum president, can be called as a primary teacher? I don't know that it is. I don't think that it is. So for me, I'm more than happy to come back. I really am. I don't feel safe there, and I don't feel my views are welcome.
That's honest. At the really point. Honest.
Another, and this may be a sharper response to it, but to give you a perspective of someone that does hold beliefs, and while I try to be very sensitive about sharing those, and we've tried to work through very sensitively in our marriage and in friendships with people that ask me why, I still hold pretty firm opinions. And from my perspective, I look at, and this is a very stark example, so I hope it's not, I'm trying to think of one that's not as severe. But let's say that there's a kid growing up in his parents are, oh gosh, I really hate this example. I'm sorry, I'm making editing hard on you. I'm just going to say it, and you can edit it out if you don't like it. But it reminds me of if someone was raised in Syria and his parents were members of ISIS. Again, pretty direct and pretty violent, literally, example. If he did not know that community that he was in did very harmful things to other groups of people, and all of a sudden he, at the age of 20, finds out that, oh my goodness, my uncle is killing people because of their beliefs, that would be very shocking to him, and he would say, absolutely not. I'm not going to be a part of it. I got to get out somehow. But if that same child is taught from a very young age, the age of 5, that the killing of these people is okay, then he's going to grow up thinking it's okay. That's the hard part. There's a wall between me and you right now, Richard, because there are things that I don't think are okay. And I struggle with the possibility of my kids being taught those things in the coming years and taught that they're normal. And that's very difficult.
It's honest.
Because I don't want them to feel like those things are normal.
And I just sense your sincerity in that and a conviction, and I'm okay with that. I think you've done a good job of that. Any thoughts on that, Katie?
I'd like to say yes and. I think that our kids are going to learn a lot of things at church. They're also going to learn a lot of things at school, at home, with their friends, and elsewhere. So it's our job as parents to teach them the right thing. And if they choose to continue to go to church, or, maybe we can talk to them. We do a lot of talking after church. What did you learn? What does it mean to you? Do you believe it? That sort of thing, just at their level, because we want them to be able to develop their own sense of ideas and come to their own conclusions, right? But we also want to encourage. So I mean, obviously I don't feel the same way as Allan, but I absolutely respect how he feels, and as a partner and spouse and as a father, I can understand why he feels the way he does.
And that is why what she just said is why I'm not stomping my foot and putting it down and saying, you will not be going to seminary, you will not be doing this, because we've taken a proactive approach to have the conversations with them and allow them space to choose what they're going to believe. So thank you for saying that, Katie.
Any concluding thoughts either of you'd like to share?
I would like to say, if you are going through if you're in a mixed faith marriage, if you yourself are in crisis, there's help. There are wonderful, amazing therapists. There are people out there. There are podcasts that you're listening to now that you can find that are here to help you. You're not alone. I think that's the overall feeling I want people to feel, is that, even in our darkest times, there are people that are willing to put themselves out there in order for someone else to gain understanding or feel love or whatever it is that they need from that. And I think that those are why we came to earth. We have these Christ-like qualities, and we're trying to learn how to connect with people in our own pain. And there are people that are trying to do that. And so please, if you want to follow us or contact us, we're Marriage on a Tightrope, and we're always here to listen. And I think that's it for me.
It's great, Katie. Allan.
I don't want to add much because that was beautiful. One thing I would say is, especially for those that are just finding themselves in this situation, either mixed faith marriage or the beginning of a faith crisis, give yourself time. Don't feel like you have to make life-changing decisions right now. It's the worst time in the world to make emotional decisions, is right in the heart of your dark night of the soul. Give yourself time. It feels like the world is crumbling around you. It feels like everything is not what you thought it was. You're not trusting anything. You're not trusting yourself. You're not trusting your spouse. Cling to your spouse. Cling to what you know about them and what that you love about them. It's going to be better. It gets better. It's not perfect. And the things that we have talked about today, we're presenting the best parts of our relationship. We still argue. So allow yourself that. Make the mistakes, not on purpose, but when you make them, don't look at an edited podcast and think, oh, we can't do that. That's impossible. It's possible. It's okay. Don't beat yourself up. Give yourself time.
This is just a great podcast, and it's a great work you're doing. And I'm thinking back to the gospel essays. I brought those up in our own elders' quorum maybe 6 months ago, and the impression I gave to the elders was, you ought to say a prayer and ask Heavenly Father if it's right for you to read these.
I like that.
Versus just a requirement that everybody read them. Mm-hmm. And because I just think that content is something that may be helpful for some and some that may not be. It can generate a faith crisis. I've met, just like it did with you. And you innocently were preparing an elders quorum lesson. I've heard other stories like that of people that I really deeply admire. So you're turning to church-authorized resources that generated a faith crisis. And so I think the gospel essays are there. I think the leaders are trying to figure out the best way to present this content and so it's not, some would say it should be on the front page of the church's website and everybody should read them. And I probably maybe thought that at one point, but now I don't. And I think it's everybody's individual journey. I also remember our elders quorum president talking about visiting him, and I've shared this before, a man in our ward who's not been active for over 2 decades, and he got to know him well enough that he took him out to lunch, and he just said to him, tell me the story of why you don't attend. And that guy got kind of tears in his eyes, and he said, I've lived in this ward for 20 plus years, and no one's ever asked me that question. And the thought came to my mind. It's a thought from Taylor Christensen, an earlier podcast young man, who said the Good Shepherd knew his sheep well enough to know where they were and where to find them and why they were there. And so I'm not sure that every member can do that, though. I'm not sure every member could talk to you, Allan, and have the ability to fully hear. My brother could, Dave, and I think I could, and I would have now that I couldn't 5 years ago. Or 10 years ago, I've been really scared of you. And so I'm glad, but I'm not sure I'm not trying to elevate myself over other members of the church, but everybody just has different gifts. So, and I think you're good at sort of honoring that. But I do think we've got to develop overall my brother Dave talks about this. He believes leaders just don't quite know what to do with people like you. No one's really had training on what do we do when a member comes. And you're right. I think you mentioned before we started that the first person you talked to wasn't even familiar with the gospel essay, so they had no framework to even discuss the very facts you were discussing. And so I do think that's one of the things you're helping and others are helping, is just to help local leaders have better tools to know what to do and know how to fully meet your needs, Katie, and fully meet your needs. And it sounds like you had pretty good local leaders. Yeah. But you've heard enough of those experiences to know that can be a very difficult experience. Mm-hmm. And I always felt our ward, and I realize this probably isn't realistic in your situation. I've always felt the ward, our YSA ward, needed to not have a belief or behavior hurdle to feel welcome. Everybody should feel welcome. And I think on your elders quorum assignments, you feel welcome. Right. Because there's no belief or behavior hurdle, and you'll even lead and do some of these things, and I like that. And I'm not in charge of the general councils of the church to know how we do that, but and I've always thought the temple recommend questions are kind of belief and behavior. And the longer I spend with people like you, I've recognized the behavior is usually not the challenge. I mean, you could have a temple recommend, I sense, and the behavior questions are fine. It's the belief questions that are harder. Yeah. And I've always felt it's harder to control belief than behavior. So I want to give more space then for people with different levels of belief, because there's D&C whatever says to some it's given to know, to some it's given belief. And I realize you don't have really either of those right now. And so I don't want to, but I do wonder if we can improve as a church and create more space for different levels of belief, as people are doing their best to come into Christ, and we can just mature, and there's less fear and less defensiveness. And as we share a thoughtful alternative view, that doesn't necessarily need to be triggering. And I recognize you realize that's not possible right now in your ward. And you tried to do that for a period of time, and it just wasn't possible, and you recognize maybe it's not even helpful. Right. So it's just very helpful for me to have an honest discussion of how we navigate this space. And I'm so glad that both of you are on the podcast, and encourage our listeners to go find your podcast, Marriage on a Tightrope, and really glad to have this wonderful couple, Allan and Katie Mount, on the podcast, and consider you really dear friends. And thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you.
And thanks to our listeners for joining us on another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.